media here, because I think that actually might be one of the worst elements. Is I would be remiss to think of a single national sports personality who is not in league with the gambling companies at a basic advertising level, either direct partnership with DraftKings, FanDuel, Hard Rock Bet, any of these points bet, any prize picks. If you pick even a cultural figure, a sports line figure, they are directly in league with the gambling companies. What do you think that does for coverage of the sport? For example, had an excerpt from your book went quite viral about Bill Simmons over at the Ringer.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that. But the first name that popped in my head was Bob Costas, who spoke with me. And his father had a gambling problem, he told me. And so when he was calling baseball games and they wanted him to tout parlays or read sportsbook ads, he said, I just don't feel comfortable doing that. And they gave him a pass. The takeaway, I think, is you need to be a 30-time Emmy winner, a legend of broadcasting, to be able to opt out of that. It's just become a fact of life for so many journalists. But at the same time, I don't want to let people like Bill Simmons off the hook, because they've made millions and millions of dollars by hawking sports books, normalizing the idea that firing all these parlays and low odds prop bets is just the way to be a sports fan nowadays. The influence of that on making this the default way of engaging with sports can't be understated. Consequence of it, besides just giving the impression that this is a harmless no big deal way of being a fan now, is it also handcuffs a lot of sports outlets that could be reporting on the dangers of betting, rising addiction, the risks of corruption we were just talking about. All of that, you'll be watching sports networks and feel like there's a conspicuous silence about that stuff. Mm-hmm. Even with Bill Simmons, as I wrote about in the book, this guy who is burnt a reputation as this defiant truth teller. When Jonte Porter was arrested, or when other games that I know he cares a lot about were exposed to have fixing scandals, he's very, kind of tongue-tied and, really watching his words in a way that he doesn't typically. And I think it's because FanDuel is one of his biggest sponsors. And that's true of so much of the media. And just lastly, I'll quote a former ESPN reporter named Henry Abbott, who said, when you think about all that, sports media is really being bribed by all this advertising dollars. The bribe is, we'll give you millions and millions of dollars, and in exchange, don't say anything that would either embarrass these sports books or embarrass the leagues for partnering with them and profiting so handsomely from this betting explosion.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit more about that human cost. How is this? You're a fallible human being, and you're up against this giant business that is spending as much money as it needs to get you hooked, to trick you, to make sure that you always lose. What is the cost that this has had for people?
We're seeing addiction rates rise. The expectation for a long time had been that about 1 or maybe even 2% of the population is prone to a gambling problem. In states that have legalized it, health experts believe it's closer to 6 or 8%.
Wow.
Among young men who are the target demo, it's much higher. As bad as that is, and I tell some really heartbreaking stories in the book of the most ordinary people who seem like they're smart and know about sports and wouldn't, get themselves down that road. I also think that people can hear addiction stories and say, well, that doesn't apply to me. Like, that's sad, but I don't have a gambling problem. And what we're seeing is such pervasive rates of problematic gambling, even if you don't have a clinically diagnosable problem. And what I mean by that is a third of gamblers saying they've felt ashamed after how much money they've lost.